So my number three film that shaped my love of seeing movies in a group is Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace from 1999. This is a film written and directed by George Lucas, starring Ewan McGregor, Liam Neeson, Natalie Portman, and Jake Lloyd. IMDb plot summary: two Jedi escape a hostile blockade to find allies and come across a young boy who may bring balance to the Force, but the long dominant Sith resurface to claim their original glory. So this movie was important to me in many ways in terms of my group experience. But what this represents is why it is so fun to watch a movie for the first time with a group of people that no one has seen the film, and you all get to experience this as fans of whatever this movie is going to be together. And seeing what moments the crowd is excited about. You have your enthusiasm that is immediately shared by everyone around you. And yes, this is Star Wars, but it also could be opening night of a Fincher film with all the the people who love David Fincher there. Or I just saw Oppenheimer recently, and all the Christopher Nolan fans. Like, you can tell that they're there in the audience. You're sort of experiencing that with them. But this movie, to me, was the very first time that I did organize a large group to go see the film. It wasn't a midnight show. I was still in high school, and this is right before I got into going to midnight movies. But it was 7:00, opening night. Obviously, this was a giant phenomenon for those who might not remember or maybe weren't alive around the time. But, Star Wars had been this big thing in the 70s and 80s. And then you thought they were never going to make another movie again.
Right.
And also Star Wars really wasn't as much in the culture as it is even now. Like, I was a huge Star Wars fan growing up, but I was sort of still like the nerd kid who liked Star Wars. It wasn't so mainstream as it was now. And it wasn't like everywhere there was Star Wars everything. It was kind of a little wilderness years for a while there, especially in the 90s. So this was a big coming out for all the Star Wars fans of like, okay, now we can be back in the, in the mainstream again. And I mean, everyone was talking about this thing, news reports, the whole nine. So it was a lot of hype for this movie. Then I'll talk more about my experiences in the film and what my thoughts about it are. But I'm just curious if in India, the hype was probably still just as big. And when did you first see this movie, and did you get caught up in it at all?
Yeah, had not seen this movie until the podcast. And I don't think there was a Star Wars hype in
Interesting.
India. Or
okay.
maybe if it was, at least not in my circles. I obviously knew of it, but that was sort of it. So
Interesting.
maybe people were camping out or queuing up in lines the day before or the week before, which I know you did for this.
Yeah, for the second one, I camped
second
for a
one.
week.
Gotcha,
yeah, we can listen to the previous episode around
yes.
movies in a theater where I talk about that. Yeah.
Yes, but yeah, not really. So no, this was my first time watching this movie. And
interesting.
Yeah.
I'm curious that if you've never seen this before, just watching it by yourself on TV, like, was probably not a fun experience for you, huh?
No, not. I mean, it's not a good movie, which is no hot take.
I'll defend it, but anyway, keep
okay.
going.
I'm very curious. But the thing with these movies is that these movies are so much bigger than the movies themselves, right? It's such a part of people's lives and growing up and all of it. So it honestly doesn't even matter if the movie lives up to the originals or what have you. Like, it doesn't matter, honestly. Like, it's much bigger than that. So if I were here and growing up with you, and if this movie came out, like, it would be the event of my life. There's no question about that. But yeah, watching it, like, the characters and a lot of it just doesn't make sense, the motivations and what have you. That said, you still get swept up in the magic of it. That's sort of what Star Wars does. Like, it takes you to a different place. It sort of pushes a different button in your mind, which is still fun and enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely the experience, again, seeing it opening night with this audience. I mean, it was a lot like,
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, like, it's a religious experience. Like, I was not raised in any kind of specific religion, definitely secular household, but it would be like going to a religious service. You have all the devotees there. Some people would dress up in costumes. I mean, I was not in costumes, but you get the second the opening crawl comes up, everyone just goes crazy, clapping, cheering. And this also is something, nowadays, and we've even been to several Marvel movies like this. It is a lot more part of that movie going experience. But I never, as a kid in 1999, it was not a normal thing for people to be cheering and clapping and jumping up in a movie when you see it. I mean, maybe like a Rocky Horror midnight show or something, but I never experienced anything like this before at all. And the opening crawl, people go crazy. The first time the Jedis, you see Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon, they take off their hoods. People just went nuts.
Uh,
There's a line when R2D2 sort of does something heroic in the first 10 minutes, and he comes
right.
back in. They're like, "Oh, who is this robot?" And they're like, "Oh, this is R2D2." And then everyone also was like, "Oh, it's R2. Oh my God." It's like seeing
Right.
your old friends again. And then the end, I don't know if maybe the end action sequence didn't hold up as much for you, but the final
Yeah.
sequence in the movie where there's the 4 intercutting action sequences happening at the same time, which is one level up from what they did in Jedi. So you have space battle, there's land battle, there's Queen Amidala trying to get to her throne room, and there's the Jedi fights. That whole sequence at the end just, I mean, when Darth Maul ignites that lightsaber and that second blade comes out, even though it was in the trailer, we knew it was coming. I mean, people just like the whole theater just went nuts. And again, I never experienced anything like this before. And it was hard. It's hard for me not to, every time I see this movie, not just think back to those
Mhm.
moments of like turning to my high school friends, be like, oh my God, I can't believe this just happened. Or the surprise, even I was didn't realize that Natalie Portman was playing 2 roles. I was stupid. I didn't
Right,
know that
right.
twist actually I remember turning to a friend like, oh my God, he's like, oh shit, that was her. So those sort of things, like, looking back on it, it really was a lot of the things that I've been experiencing in the last 10 years now with, comic book movies and even Star Wars sort of taking over, for better or for worse, the film going experience. This was the beginning of that for me.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's been moments like in Endgame and Avengers Endgame. I think that was a bigger experience for me when it came to this, but this was the first one, and it sort of changed my love of wanting to go to the movies in theaters, see movies with a giant group, take all my friends. I mean, this really was the genesis of that for me. And again, I will defend the film. I think it is sets up it puts the chess pieces on the board that 6 films, because I don't really count the Disney films. The original 6 films, it puts all the pieces on the board that you need to sort of get to the end of that story for Anakin, and then the entire Skywalker family, and what happens to the Empire when they take over, when they get overthrown. So I still
Yeah.
actually think this movie holds up really well, and I like it the more times I see it. And it's gone through a little bit of renaissance in the
Mm.
last 6 or 7 years. Like a lot of the really young kids who saw it at the time really loved it, and folks more my age, like teenagers and in their 20s, really poo-pooed it, and the movie was kind of crapped on for a really long time. And I do now think it's being given the respect it deserves by the younger generation, kind of saving the respect for this film. But yeah, very different experience than you seeing this just on your couch. But
I know.
one day we'll have to do a whole Star Wars marathon sometime. I can sit next to you and
Yeah.
recreate some of those experiences.
I was just thinking that,
Yeah.
this is probably one of the things that it'll be in the top 3 things that I sort of missed, I think, growing up here, that I just could never really truly experience the lore and the fandom and the sort of the religion of Star Wars. Like, I just know from a distance how important it is, how much it means to people, but also just to the cinematic evolution of times. I feel like I kind of missed it.
Yeah, it was. I was just about a month ago, actually. John Williams, who's the
Yeah,
composer, which again, actually, this score is unbelievable. The Duel of the
score is
Fates is
unbelievable.
still
Yeah.
like, I remember getting the soundtrack and listening to it forever in my car. But I was just at a John Williams concert. He played the Hollywood Bowl about a month ago, and whenever the Star Wars songs would come on, like
Oh,
everyone would pull out their lightsabers and sort
same.
of
I
like,
saw that
and
concert too, a little
and
before you. Yeah.
it is kind of
Yeah.
awe inspiring of like, wow, they really did, this franchise and these movies, and obviously the music too, just touch so many people in a way that, just seeing that expression is cool. And it definitely mirrored what it's like in a theater when you're seeing one of these, especially this movie too, the first one in 15 years or whatever, since that other Star Wars Return of the Jedi came out, a movie we never thought they would ever make, episode 1. So again, very different times now, where Star Wars is sort of lost its magic. There's too much Star Wars. It's not special
Yeah.
anymore. But every time I see this movie, I go back to that time and just remember again that experience with my friends, and all the strangers in the audience too. That again, after leaving the theater, everyone was like, "This is the best thing we've ever seen." And it wasn't until I think later, some of the folks, kind of, it wore off on them. But I'm glad you
Yeah,
saw
and
it.
that's the thing, right? It doesn't matter actually. I mean,
Right.
the movie's probably good, and like you said, it's regaining its kind of popularity and what have you, but it doesn't matter actually. It's
Yeah.
more about the shared experience and the surprise aspect. Maybe that's another interesting point that you made, that now we know because people have already announced the 10 next movies that are coming out.
Right.
We live in that kind of a world where there's just so much information, and there's something kind of fun and cool about just not knowing that they're going to make this again, and then they do make it, and it's the biggest event of your life.
Totally. Yeah. And also I think just again, in watching this now, the sort of Easter eggs and fan call out moments in this film feel very organic and natural. Whereas now you'll watch some of these later Marvel movies where it's like they have a little pause in the film because they know people will be cheering, and it just feels very inauthentic. Where can we place the Easter eggs to get people crazy? That's not how George Lucas really ever thought about these things. Everything is organic to the story. And yeah, you do have those applause moments, like when R2 is the way they say his name for the first time, but it wasn't built around that moment being important. It's like, okay, here's R2, and we're not going to wait 5 minutes where everyone goes crazy in the theater. So it's like, it's a more innocent time. In like geek filmmaking of just like, we're not really spoon feeding anything to you guys anymore, which I think unfortunately the Marvel franchise has sort of ended in that place where now everything has to just be spoon fed to the audience, like,
and connected to the million things that have come before and after and what have you.
Right.
The real word is innocence. I always, even though I was not part of Star Wars lore and such, whenever I watch a Star Wars movie, I always get that feeling that it's child play. There's something innocent about this, the way it's constructed. It's just so purely creative from everybody, obviously from Lucas at the helm. So yeah, makes sense.
Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now, or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.